One of the main qualitative research methods is phenomenological research, sometimes known as phenomenology. And this type of research typically stems from either philosophy or psychology, depending on which branch of phenomenology you are looking at. So, briefly, I'm going to go over what phenomenological research is and kind of why we would use it as nurses doing research studies. Mostly, when you see the words lived experiences, you should automatically think of phenomenology or phenomenological research because that's what the main focus of this type of research is. It's learning about how people describe their lives and the experiences they've had during their lifetimes. And you can see the question on your slide. This is basically what we're asking. What is the essence of this phenomenon that we're studying as it's been experienced by the people we're talking to? And a lot of times we're trying to dig deeper, not just at what the experience was, but what did it mean to that person? And at the end of this presentation, I'll have a couple of examples to help make this be a little bit more understandable. Most of the time, how we get data in phenomenological studies is through very in-depth conversations. You're not going to understand what someone's lived experience was if you do not really dig deep into their experiences. So you have to talk to them, often in very intense, intimate conversations and interviews. There's two main types of phenomenological research that your book goes over. And so I just wanted to show you kind of the differences between those. One is descriptive, as you see on this slide, and the other is interpretive. So that one is going to be on the next slide. So basically, descriptive phenomenological research is doing exactly what it says it's going to do. It's describing. We're simply wanting to describe the lived experiences of our participants. We're not really worried about the meaning, just the basic descriptions. So you'll see that on the bottom, you typically see something called bracketing happening during descriptive phenomenological studies. And what that means is that the researcher needs to try to understand what he or she believes and what kind of possible biases and preconceived notions they have about this idea. So, for instance, let's say I'm doing a study about the experiences of living with early onset dementia. And what if one of my family members has early onset dementia? It's going to be very difficult for me to remain totally unbiased, having had those experiences myself with a loved one. So, oftentimes, these researchers will use journaling, reflective journaling, to where they can kind of pour out everything they feel and believe about the topic. And then they believe, because I've kind of come to terms with that, I can set it to the side now and I can focus on what my study participants are telling me. The goal is to not have my experiences bleed over into the stories I'm hearing from my participants. Now, on paper, that sounds great, but it's going to be next to impossible for you to totally take away all of the possible biases you might have in that instance. Okay. The next slide, interpretive phenomenological research, is the second big type. And basically, we're going to describe, but we're adding the meaning to it. And you'll see the word hermeneutics on the screen. Don't get freaked out by that word. It basically just means understanding. So we're digging a little bit deeper. We're going to hear their stories, but we want to understand the hidden, deeper meanings behind what they've said and how they've said it. So we don't do bracketing, because we want to bring our experiences in as researchers to help us understand the deeper meanings behind what the participants have said. And of course, we're going to use interviews just as with all phenomenological research, but sometimes we supplement through diaries. Maybe we have them do photo journals, so we can not only hear what they have to say, but see what it means to them as well. So that would fall under artistic expressions. So you can kind of see a little bit of differences between the two. I went backwards. I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay, so sampling. How do we even get people to be in our studies? Very often, phenomenological studies are small. We have very small sample sizes, often even fewer than 10. Basically, the people who are in the study have experienced whatever we're studying. So having a loved one with early onset dementia, and they have to be willing to share their stories and pour out those emotions that are inherent in those stories. So usually small samples, and that's pretty common in these types of phenomenological studies. This is one example. This is a descriptive phenomenological study, and I'm not sure if anybody in this class has worked with burn trauma patients, but if you have, you know that they are typically in a lot of pain, and it's very difficult for nurses to do everything they can and still see those patients lying in the bed in excruciating pain. And so that's what this story is. It's telling the stories and lived experiences of those nurses who work in burn units and how they feel powerless because they can't do everything to take away the patient's pain. That's still part of the healing process. It's a very powerful article. And then the last one I chose was Living Alone with Dementia. This one's interpretive. So they not only described, but they also dug deeper into the meanings. And you can see on the slide that the theme of holding back time was very common. They talked about dreading the passage of time because they knew that they were early onset and that at some point they were going to turn out to be like their friends who they've seen, who have gotten really bad, and they worried about the toll that that would take on their families. And these kinds of studies can be very powerful for us as nurses because these tie into our empathy and our compassion. It's not giving us all this, it's not necessarily going to help us with policies and procedures, but it can help us understand what it's like for our patients who are lying in that bed. They're not just a patient with dementia, they have a whole life behind them. And when we read studies like this, it helps us to truly bring that nature into our care that we provide to the patients at the bedside each day. So hopefully this has given you a good understanding of the basics of phenomenological research. You could take a whole graduate course on just this alone, but for our purposes, this is enough to get you accustomed to it so that when you read one, you understand the purpose behind the study and kind of what to look for as far as sampling and data collection goes. Thanks for watching.